All right, here we are at the Earthship Tiny House where we've been spending the last month building this Murphy bed. It's a pretty small space and it needed an upgrade, so the owner got in touch with me. We decided to come up with something really awesome that was going to make this space even more user-friendly, include some new features, and we learned a lot. It's looking great, and in this video we're going to show you how we did it.
It all starts with the design. Even though we've built Murphy beds before, this project comes with new and unique design challenges which we wouldn't have to deal with in a conventional stick frame building where the walls are flat and vertically plumb. Because earthships are buried on three sides, the rammed earth tire walls are battered aggressively, 1.5 inches per course, in order to retain the thousands of pounds of earth behind them. Now this works great if you're trying to create a house that heats and cools itself passively without needing HVAC systems, but it's not so great when you're building custom cabinets against the irregularly sloped earth and plaster walls. Now don't get me wrong, working alongside a water recycling indoor ecosystem where banana trees are growing inside the home year-round is certainly one of the perks of the job. And I love talking about how these houses work, but that's not the topic of this video. So if you're interested in learning more, check out the Earthship 101 guide and the paper model kit available exclusively in our new merch store, using the link on the screen or below the video. Now let me show you how I used 3D modeling to visualize design solutions for this project before cutting a single piece of wood. As my dad used to say, prior planning prevents piss-poor performance. The first thing we wanted to see was how the bed was going to interact with the sloped walls of the house. By adjusting the angle of the wall in the 3D model, I was able to start designing up to it, imagining how the bookshelves and end tables on the sides would fit into the irregular space. When thinking about installation, the model helped. I was able to include realistic details such as the wooden ledge at the top of the wall, which we planned on using in order to attach the cabinet to the wall instead of driving screws into the beautiful earth and plaster. But as with any design, whether 3D or on paper, it's not always how things turn out in reality. This model was just an artist's sketch to give myself and the client a rough idea of what the end product is going to look like. Ultimately, the visualizing process did save me some headache when I realized that it would be much easier to install floating shelves on the sides rather than trying to build them up against the plaster. In the end, I got back to the client with a quick and sloppy edit that got my point across. We agreed on the design, and the project got the green light. Fabrication. The heart of a Murphy bed are the mechanisms that make the magic happen. We got our hardware kit from Rockler Woodworking, which comes with a set of plans, including cut sheets, templates, and an assembly guide. If you follow their design exactly, the entire installation can be made using mostly plywood and the provided hardware. I later discovered that the hardware is technically manufactured by Create-A-Bed, which also offers their own DIY bed kits and add-ons. So I wanted to give both companies a shout out, and I'll put a link to them in the video description below. Anyways, my week started at the lumber yard, where I strapped a load of plywood and 2x4s to the rack of my Prius, and bought some new clamps for the project. The house I was renting at the time became our wood shop, and the yard became the fabrication station. After we got set up, we started measuring and made the first cut, which turned out like shit because my saw blade was dull from the last job. Luckily, I had another blade laying around, and I didn't have to go back to the store. However, I did need to borrow my dad's Allen wrenches for the job, setting me up for the first fatherly lecture of the project.
All right. That's how they get lost. You gotta put them back where they belong, where you found them.
We got to cutting, and a stray dog decided to stop by and supervise the project.
In dog talk, I think that means I'm hungry.
And when the sun went down, I strapped on my headlamp and kept chugging, working until the last light. The next day, we got up bright and early to finish the rest of our cuts. The mantra of the day was, measure twice, cut once, as my father always said. We had our list and we checked it twice. When working outside in the hot sun, it makes a big difference to be in the shade of a canopy tent, which we had to move periodically during the day to stay cool. We started by assembling the bed platform, the largest single piece of the installation. The instructions use plywood for the inner bed frame, which is cut into long strips and screwed together in an L shape. And while it's an attempt to maximize the use of plywood in the design, I found it to be way too time-consuming the last time I built one of these. So I decided to use solid wood instead, which we cut on the table saw. We laid out the resulting 1.5 by 1.5 pieces carefully on the bed platform, making sure to pay attention to the 1/4 inch offset on the long side, a crucial measurement that ensures everything lines up properly once it's all assembled. And once we were confident with our layout, Dad was able to start assembling that on his own, while I began working on the side rails next to him. I marked the beveled cut with a cookie tin lid as a guide, and marked the holes for the leg hardware, and cutting the bevel with the jigsaw. And the holes with a 5/8 diameter paddle bit, 1/2 inch deep. I used a backer board to prevent blowout on the next step, which is drilling a 1 inch diameter through hole for the female pivot part. Even with the backer, I ended up with a little blowout, which is fine because the hardware will cover it. The female pivot hardware is then screwed in place using a speed square to keep it parallel with the rail. Next is the ball stud plate, which, because it receives the pistons, you need to use a spacer to align the ball before screwing the plate down. I used a 5/16 piece of scrap wood, which you can see here. In addition, because these plates bear the weight of the platform via the pistons, there is more rotational force on them than the female pivot part, which simply screwed in place. They require that we drill through holes in order to receive the machine screws and T-nuts, which will hold them in place. The T-nut is inserted in the hole, while the machine screws is threaded into the nut from the other side. Another piece that uses this technique is the leg assembly. Which requires the same treatment of drilling through holes in order to receive the T-nut fastener. However, unlike the rest of the hardware, once the legs are aligned and the holes are drilled, we simply leave them on the side until they're ready to be installed, otherwise they would simply be in the way for the next step. Now we're ready to assemble the platform, screwing the head and foot rail we cut earlier to the inner frame, as well as the side rails we just fabricated. With all of that assembled, the next step is to lift the inner frame off the face panels in order to glue it down. But before we do that, Pops traces the inner frame with a pencil so we know where to put the glue. Very important. Then, with only a few alignment screws keeping it in place, it's easy to detach the inner frame and lift it away. We quickly clamp the face panels down and get gluing. Carefully placing the frame back in place using the pencil lines to keep it aligned. Clamping it down once again on the edges while screwing it down in the center. Pops even came up with a special solution for the hard-to-reach places. With overnight rain in the forecast, we didn't want to risk leaving our work outside, which was a good choice because the next day we discovered that our tent had collapsed overnight. So I got to work repairing it. Ooh, what's this on the ground? Well, there's your problem. OGG to the rescue. With the tent feeling a bit better, I wanted to start the day by installing the hardware on the cabinet verticals, a precision activity requiring a lot of measuring, something I'd rather get out of the way first thing in the morning while there's still caffeine running through my veins. The speed square comes in handy for this operation, keeping the male pivot plate aligned while measuring its exact placement and setting the first screws. Once again, drilling through holes and using the T-nut fasteners for this piece, which bears the load of the entire platform and mattress. Next, a 5/16 hole is drilled 1/2 inch deep to receive the upper ball plate, whose position I measured and marked earlier. And because this hardware is also load-bearing, it gets a combination of through fasteners and screws, putting the drill bit back in the hole in order to keep the plate aligned while I fasten the screws down. And boy, that drill bit won't budge, so I'm going to have to use the chuck of my drill and reverse it out of the hole. And with the final screw in place, all that I have left is the through fasteners on both pieces. I had to lift up the verticals in order to reach back there, turn the torque down on my drill, and tighten the machine screws from above. The last piece is a metal and rubber bed stopper, which prevents the bed from going too deep in the cabinet when it's vertical. It needs to be parallel with the long edge of the cabinet, which is where the square comes in handy once again. Using the cabinet verticals as a work surface, I got started on the header, which is a simple assembly that wouldn't normally be exciting, except I get to use my new pocket hole jig for the very first time. They come in different shapes and sizes, but the bottom line is it allows you to quickly make a hole at a very shallow angle, hiding your screws entirely. Plus, it opens up different joining techniques that wouldn't otherwise be possible, which I'll show you later when I build the panels for the couch. This one is Craig Brand, and was recommended to me by a colleague who I worked with on the Tiny Plus Earthship project. So a big shout out to Alan, thanks for the tips and advice on this project. Normally the front face of the header would be covered by a crown molding, as shown in the assembly guide provided with our hardware. In their assembly, which is more straightforward, it results in the screw heads showing from the front, but if you're covering it with a header, or if you're wood puttying those holes and then painting it, it doesn't matter. But we're not going to be doing that. Our finished product is going to be stained, and the wood grain is going to be showing, so I don't want any screw holes on the front of my header. And with that component complete, Pops decided to join me and start working on the headboard, which calls for finish nails in the instructions, but we decided to go with glue. While he was busy with that, I got working on the custom couch edition, an in-house design not included in the instructions. I started by cutting a rabbet joint in some 2x4. And this is where the pocket hole jig really came in handy, as I wanted to use some unconventional joining techniques to hide my screws, creating a clean, finished look. I started by dry fitting the pieces together, then putting in a few screws to hold the sides in place while I removed the plywood panel insert, and applied glue in the rabbet channel. Repeating the process on the other side and checking square before finally setting the final screws in, locking it all together. Ta-da! Once you do the first one, the second one is always faster. Using the rabbet cuts and pocket hole jig again, I got cracking on the platform for the couch. And this is the last component we needed to fabricate. So once it's complete, we're gonna have to start thinking about transportation. And we're gonna need something other than my Prius. And then the supervisor came back on site to let us know that it was time to pack up. Plus, our cat finally made an appearance. On moving day, Pops was in great spirits.
It's a beautiful day here in Taos, New Mexico. We are on a journey.
A journey indeed, Dad. One where Isaac comes to save the day in a cartoonish vehicle from a distant land. The Taos Hopper, driven by the third musketeer, Isaac. Which is going to save us the struggle of having to strap it all to the top of the Prius.
Wonderful.
Isaac's right-hand drive Japanese micro truck is the Honda Acti Super Deluxe. Acti, short for activity. It was in production between 1977 to 2021, when they stopped production due to new regulations increasing development costs. This model is only sold in Japan. However, once it reaches 25 years old, it can be imported into the US.
In there. Such a ridiculous vehicle. It's still hard for me to like comprehend it.
Well, that's enough for one video. The story continues in part 2, where we're going to be unloading, assembling, and installing this beast of a bed, and find out if all of our planning is going to line up with reality as we tackle the installation challenges mentioned earlier in this video. Plus, one thing I haven't mentioned yet is how perfectly we were able to repurpose the lumber from Isaac's old bed frame into this project, really taking things to the next level. So if you want to check that out, be sure to watch part 2, and we'll see you in the next video.
Are you still filming?
I'm filming at the moment.
Wonderful. It's a beautiful day here in Taos, New Mexico. We are on a journey.
The audio is not going to be good.
Okay.
Sorry.